You're nothing but dead weight in this family. Those were the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and what it means to be a father. My own daughter, Cassandra, spoke them to me on what would become the most important birthday of my 67 years. But what happened next? What I did in response to those cruel words would change not just my life but expose the shocking truth about the family I had given everything to support. But before I tell you how a single night transformed me from a forgotten old man into someone who finally understood his worth, hit that subscribe button, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about family loyalty and the price of unconditional love. The morning of June 15th started like any other in our sprawling colonial house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows I had installed myself 15 years ago, illuminating the granite countertops I had paid for when Cassandra decided the original Formica wasn't sophisticated enough for her dinner parties. Coffee brewing in the machine I'd bought her for Christmas, filling the air with a rich aroma that somehow couldn't mask the bitter taste of how my life had become. I stood at the kitchen island, carefully writing out my shopping list in the precise handwriting that had served me well during my 40 years as an accountant. Beer for the grill, ribeye steaks, the good ones from Peterson's butcher shop, fresh corn, still in the husk, charcoal, simple things for what I hoped would be a simple celebration with the few friends who still remembered that Walter Eugene Hartwell existed. Cassandra. I called toward the living room where I could hear the familiar sound of her scrolling through social media, that endless digital feeding that had replaced actual conversation in our home. Would you mind driving me to the grocery store? I'm planning a little barbecue tonight for my birthday. The silence that followed felt heavy, loaded with the kind of tension that had been building between us for months. When she finally appeared in the doorway, her expression carried the same barely concealed irritation I'd grown accustomed to seeing whenever I dared to ask for help with anything. Seriously, Walter? She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, designer workout clothes that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. It's Tuesday morning. I have a Pilates class at 10, lunch with the Morrison wives at noon, and a conference call with my personal trainer at 3. You think I have time to chauffeur you around town? The words hit me like cold water. Not the refusal, I'd grown used to those, but the casual way she dismissed something that mattered to me, as if my birthday was just another inconvenience in her busy schedule of self-improvement and social networking. It's just a quick trip, I said, keeping my voice level despite the familiar ache in my chest. I invited Harold and Beatrice from next door, maybe Frank if he's feeling up to it, just a few old friends who remember when birthdays meant something. Cassandra's husband, Braden, materialized beside her like he always did when there was conflict brewing. 6 feet of entitled smugness wrapped in a polo shirt that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. His presence in the kitchen immediately made the space feel smaller, more oppressive. "What's all the commotion about?" Braden asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and disapproved. "Walter wants me to drop everything and play taxi service," Cassandra replied, her voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that had replaced affection in our family communications. Because God forbid he figure out how to call an Uber or take the bus like a normal person. I looked at them both, my daughter and the man she'd chosen to marry, and felt something crack inside my chest. These were the people I'd spent the last 20 years supporting, the ones I'd sacrificed my retirement dreams for, my travel plans, my own comfort and happiness. All because I believed that's what fathers do. That's what love looks like. You know what, Walter? Braden stepped forward, and I could see that familiar hardness in his eyes that appeared whenever he felt his authority in this house was being questioned. Maybe it's time you started understanding your position here. You live in our house. You eat our food. You use our utilities. Every single day our lives revolve around taking care of you, and frankly we're getting tired of it. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower from somewhere in the neighborhood. Normal sounds of a normal Tuesday morning in a normal family home. Except nothing about this moment felt normal anymore. Taking care of me? The words came out quieter than I intended, but they carried a weight that surprised even me. "Is that what you call this?" Cassandra laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that reminded me how different she'd become from the little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories about dragons and princesses and brave knights who always saved the day. "Oh, here we go," she said, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "The victim routine. Poor Walter. Nobody appreciates all his sacrifices. Poor Walter, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." She moved closer, and for a moment I thought maybe she was going to apologize. Maybe she'd realized how cruel her words sounded. Maybe some part of the daughter I'd raised with such love and hope was still there, buried under layers of entitlement and selfishness. Instead, she looked directly into my eyes, the same brown eyes she'd inherited from her mother, and delivered the blow that would change everything between us forever. "You want to know the truth, Walter? You're nothing but dead weight in this family. A burden we carry because we have to, not because we want to. Every single thing we do has to be planned around you and your needs and your constant demands for attention. You're 67 years old, and you act like a child who needs constant supervision." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be extinguished. I felt them settle into my bones, into the quiet spaces where my self-worth used to live. But instead of the crushing defeat I might have expected, something else began to emerge. Something harder. Something that had been waiting years for this moment. "Dead weight," I repeated, tasting the words. "A burden." Braden nodded, apparently pleased that his wife had finally said what they'd both been thinking. "Look, Walter, we're not trying to be cruel here. We're just being honest. This arrangement isn't working for anyone anymore." I looked around the kitchen I had paid to renovate 3 years ago when Cassandra decided it was too outdated for her social media posts. The cabinets I'd helped install myself, even though my arthritis made every hour of work an exercise in pain management. The breakfast nook where I'd imagined sharing quiet morning conversations with my family, back when I still believed family meant something. "You're right," I said finally, my voice steady in a way that surprised all three of us. "This arrangement isn't working." I folded the shopping list carefully and tucked it into my shirt pocket. The paper crackled softly, a sound that somehow seemed louder than all the harsh words that had been thrown around the kitchen like weapons. "I'll handle the shopping myself," I continued, reaching for my jacket from the hook by the back door. "And the barbecue, and everything else from now on." Cassandra frowned, clearly not understanding the shift in my tone. "Walter, don't be dramatic. We're just trying to establish some boundaries here." "Boundaries," I repeated. "Yes, I think that's exactly what we need." I walked toward the front door, leaving them standing in their designer kitchen with their expensive coffee maker and their carefully curated life that I had made possible through 20 years of quiet sacrifice. As I reached for the door handle, Cassandra called after me. "Where are you going? You can't just walk away from this conversation." I turned back to look at her one last time. This woman, who had once been my greatest joy, my reason for working late nights and weekend shifts, my motivation for every difficult decision I'd made since her mother died. She stood there in her perfectly coordinated outfit, surrounded by the luxury I had provided, looking at me like I was an unwelcome stranger who had overstayed his welcome. "Happy birthday to me," I said softly, and walked out of the house that had never really been my home. The summer air outside felt crisp and clean after the stifling atmosphere of that kitchen. I walked down the flagstone path I had laid myself 2 summers ago, past the garden where I grew tomatoes and peppers that Cassandra complained about because they didn't match her vision of a sophisticated landscape. Each step away from that house felt like shedding weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. My cell phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Cassandra, ready to launch into another lecture about my dramatic behavior. I pulled it out, looked at her name on the screen, and made the first truly independent decision I'd made in years. I declined the call and kept walking. The grocery store was 12 blocks away, a distance I hadn't walked in months because there was always someone around to remind me that I was too old, too fragile, too much of a burden to handle simple tasks independently. But today, with the morning sun on my face and the sounds of a neighborhood coming to life around me, those 12 blocks felt like a journey toward freedom. As I walked, memories surfaced with startling clarity. Cassandra's college graduation, where I'd sat alone in the audience because her mother had died 2 years earlier from complications related to diabetes. Complications we might have caught earlier if I hadn't been working 60-hour weeks to pay for Cassandra's sorority fees and spring break trips, and all the other expenses she'd insisted were necessary for her complete college experience. The day she'd called sobbing because her first apartment after graduation was too expensive on her entry-level salary at the marketing firm. How I'd quietly emptied my savings account to cover her security deposit and first year's rent, telling myself it was an investment in her future. Her future, never mine. The wedding I'd paid for when she married Braden, $38,000 for a single day that was supposed to be about love and commitment, but felt more like an elaborate performance designed to impress people who forgot about it a week later. I'd walked her down the aisle with such pride, believing I was giving her the perfect start to a perfect life. When had perfect become entitled? When had gratitude become expectation? When had I stopped being her father and become nothing more than a source of funding for whatever dream or crisis demanded immediate attention? Miller's Market buzzed with the comfortable activity of a Tuesday morning. Senior citizens comparing prices on breakfast cereals, young mothers navigating the aisles with shopping carts full of children and snacks, working people grabbing quick lunches before heading back to their jobs, normal people living normal lives, managing their own responsibilities without calling their aging parents dead weight. I selected each item with deliberate care. The ribeye steaks were expensive, but today felt like a day for celebrating something, even if I wasn't entirely sure what that something was yet. Fresh corn that reminded me of summers when Cassandra was young, when she'd help me husk the ears and tell me stories about her day at school. Premium charcoal because a good fire deserved quality fuel. Having a party? The cashier asked as she rang up my purchases. She was maybe 40, with kind eyes and the sort of genuine smile that had become rare in my daily interactions. A birthday barbecue, I replied, surprised by how good it felt to say the words without having to justify or explain or apologize for taking up someone's time. How wonderful. Are you the birthday boy? 67 today. Well, happy birthday. I hope you have a fantastic celebration. Such a simple exchange, but it filled me with warmth that had nothing to do with the summer weather. A stranger had shown me more genuine kindness in 30 seconds than my own family had managed in months. The walk home passed in contemplative silence, grocery bags balanced carefully in my hands. With each step, I felt myself becoming someone different. Not the man who apologized for asking for rides or tiptoed around his own house to avoid inconveniencing anyone. Someone who remembered what it felt like to make decisions based on his own desires rather than other people's convenience. The house looked different when I returned, still the same white colonial with the perfectly manicured lawn that I maintained because Cassandra worried about property values. Still the same flower beds I'd planted and weeded and watered for years. But somehow, it felt less like home and more like a stage set for a play I no longer wanted to perform in. Inside, I could hear the television playing in the living room, some reality show about wealthy people creating artificial drama for the cameras. How fitting. Cassandra and Braden were probably sprawled on the leather sectional I'd bought them for their anniversary, comfortable in their certainty that I would eventually apologize and return to my role as the grateful dependent who never caused problems. I unpacked my groceries methodically, arranging everything with the precision I'd learned during my accounting career. Steaks in the refrigerator, corn in a bowl on the counter, charcoal by the back door, each item placed with ceremony, as if I were preparing for something much more significant than a simple birthday dinner. The dining room table awaited decoration. I pulled out my good china, the set Maria and I had received as a wedding gift 43 years ago. pieces that held memories of anniversary dinners and holiday celebrations, and quiet Sunday mornings when love felt as solid and permanent as the earth beneath our feet. The doorbell rang at precisely 5:30 p.m., just as I was lighting the grill. Harold and Beatrice stood on my front porch with warm smiles and a bottle of wine, their faces lighting up when they saw me. "Walter, happy birthday, dear friend." Beatrice kissed my cheek, her perfume a gentle reminder of grace and kindness that had nothing to do with obligation or expectation. Harold clapped my shoulder with the firm grip of a man who'd worked construction for 30 years before retirement gave him time to appreciate quieter pleasures. "Ready to celebrate another year of wisdom?" Frank arrived moments later, moving slowly but determinedly with his walking cane, carrying a six-pack of the craft beer we'd discovered together at last month's farmer's market. Despite his recent stroke, he'd insisted on coming, and his presence filled me with gratitude for friendships that existed without conditions or constant negotiation. "This is what I call a perfect evening," Beatrice said as we gathered around the patio table I'd set with care. Good friends, good weather, and the promise of Walter's famous grilling skills. We talked about books and travel, about grandchildren and garden vegetables, and the small victories that make ordinary days extraordinary. Harold told stories about his latest woodworking projects. Beatrice shared updates from her volunteer work at the animal shelter. Frank, still regaining his speech after the stroke, made us laugh with his dry observations about the absurdities of physical therapy. These were conversations between equals, between people who valued each other's company without keeping score of who had done what, for whom. The difference was startling after months of interactions that felt more like business transactions than family connections. As we were finishing dinner, the back door slid open with more force than necessary. Cassandra stepped onto the patio, her expression a carefully composed mask of social appropriateness that didn't quite hide the irritation underneath. "Oh," she said, as if surprised to find people in her own backyard. "I didn't realize Walter was entertaining guests." My friends looked up with polite smiles, clearly trying to navigate the sudden tension that had invaded our peaceful gathering. Beatrice, ever the diplomat, stood to make introductions. "You must be Walter's daughter. I'm Beatrice from next door. We've heard so much about you." Cassandra's smile was practiced and hollow. "How lovely to meet you all. I hope Walter hasn't been boring you with his stories." The casual dismissal in her voice made Harold's eyebrows rise slightly. Frank's grip tightened on his beer bottle. These were people who understood respect, who recognized the difference between affection and contempt. "Actually," Harold said carefully, "Walter was just telling us about the garden he's been cultivating. Quite impressive what he's managed to grow this season." "Oh yes, the famous tomatoes." Cassandra's laugh carried an edge that made everyone uncomfortable. "Walter spends hours out there every day fussing over plants like they're his children. I keep telling him it would be easier to just buy vegetables at the store, but he insists on doing everything the hard way." The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice looked confused, clearly trying to understand why a daughter would speak about her father's hobbies with such casual cruelty. Harold's face had hardened in a way I'd never seen before. Frank was staring at Cassandra with the sort of direct assessment that came from a lifetime of reading people's true character. "Well," Beatrice said finally, "we think Walter's garden is wonderful. There's something special about growing your own food, isn't there? Such patience and care required." Cassandra shrugged. "I suppose, if you have that kind of time to waste." That's when Braden appeared, as if summoned by some invisible signal that his wife needed backup in her campaign to diminish me in front of witnesses. "Hope you folks are enjoying the party," he said with false heartiness. "Walter does love his little gatherings. Of course, we're usually the ones who end up cleaning up the mess afterward." I felt something snap inside my chest. These people, my own family, were standing on the patio I maintained, in the yard I landscaped, outside the house I'd helped them buy, actively trying to embarrass me in front of the only people who'd bothered to celebrate my birthday. Actually, I said, standing up from the table, I handle my own cleanup just like I handle my own shopping, my own cooking, and my own expenses for gatherings like this. Braden's smile faltered slightly. Right, of course, I just meant... You meant to make me look incompetent in front of my guests, just like Cassandra meant to make my hobbies sound like pathetic time wasting. Just like both of you meant to make it clear that I'm some kind of burden who should be grateful for your barely concealed contempt. The patio fell completely silent, except for the gentle sizzle of the grill and the distant sound of evening birds settling into their roosts. My friends looked back and forth between us, clearly realizing they were witnessing something much more significant than a simple family disagreement. Harold cleared his throat. Walter, thank you for a wonderful evening. Perhaps we should... No, I said firmly. Please finish your dinner. This is my birthday party in my backyard with my friends, and I'm not going to let anyone make you feel unwelcome. Cassandra's careful social mask finally slipped completely. Your backyard? Your house? Walter, let me remind you of a few facts. This property is in our name. The mortgage payments come from our account. The utilities, the insurance, the taxes, all our responsibility. You live here because we allow it, and frankly, I'm getting tired of pretending otherwise. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to strip away whatever dignity I had left in front of people whose respect mattered to me. But instead of the shame and embarrassment she clearly expected, I felt something entirely different rising in my chest. Clarity. Pure, clean, liberating clarity. You're absolutely right, Cassandra, I said, my voice steady as stone. This isn't my house. These aren't my decisions to make, and I'm certainly not welcome here. I turned to my friends, who were watching this exchange with expressions of horror and sadness that told me everything I needed to know about how my family looked to the outside world. Harold, Beatrice, Frank, thank you for making this the most honest birthday I've had in years. The company was perfect. The conversation was real, and your friendship means more to me than you'll ever know. Beatrice's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Walter, dear, are you sure? I'm sure. Please take some leftovers home. The steaks turned out perfectly, and there's no point in letting good food go to waste. I walked them to the front door, carrying containers of food and accepting their hugs and whispered words of support. Harold gripped my hand firmly at the threshold. If you need anything at all, you call us, day or night. You understand? I understand, and Harold, thank you for seeing what's really happening here. After they left, I returned to find Cassandra and Braden clearing the patio table with sharp, angry movements that suggested they blamed me for making them look bad in front of the neighbors. I hope you're happy, Cassandra said without looking up from the plates she was stacking. You just made this entire family look dysfunctional in front of people we have to live next to. We didn't make anything look dysfunctional. We are dysfunctional. The difference is that now, I'm finally admitting it. I walked upstairs to what I'd been thinking of as my room, though Cassandra's words had made it clear it was really just temporary lodging in someone else's house. The suitcase I'd used for business travel came out of the closet. Leather handles worn smooth by decades of conference trips and client meetings back when I had a career, an identity, a life that belonged to me. Each item I folded into that suitcase represented a decision to stop pretending. The shirts I'd worn to church services where I sat alone in the pew while Cassandra and Braden slept in on Sunday mornings. The sweaters Maria had bought me for Christmas celebrations that became increasingly hollow after her death. When gift-giving became obligation rather than joy. The photograph of Maria and me from our last anniversary, taken just 6 months before the cancer diagnosis that changed everything. Her smile radiant, mine proud and protective. Both of us believing we had decades left to grow old together. I wrapped it carefully in a soft shirt, whispering an apology for letting her memory be tarnished by what our family had become. From downstairs, I could hear Cassandra and Braden talking in sharp, urgent whispers. Planning damage control, probably. Figuring out how to spin this situation to make themselves look reasonable and me look unreasonable. The same manipulation they'd been perfecting for years. But as I packed my modest possessions, I was thinking about numbers. Accountants' numbers. Precise, unforgiving calculations that told the real story of our family's financial arrangements. The house down payment, $47,000 from my retirement savings. Cassandra's student loans, $38,000 I'd paid off when she graduated. The wedding, $38,000 for one day of Instagram-worthy memories. Braden's business loan when his first startup failed. $22,000 with no expectation of repayment. The kitchen renovation, $15,000 because the original was too dated for entertaining. The European vacation they'd taken for their 5th anniversary, $12,000 charged to my credit card. Emergency car repairs, medical bills, impromptu shopping sprees, countless restaurant dinners and entertainment expenses that somehow always ended up on my credit cards. The running total was staggering. Over $200,000 in the past 6 years alone. Money I'd given freely, believing it was building something. Building relationships, building security, building a legacy of family love that would sustain us all. Instead, I'd built a prison. A golden cage where I exchanged financial support for the privilege of being tolerated in my own daughter's life. I zipped the suitcase closed, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. Everything I truly needed fit into one bag. Everything else, the furniture, the decorations, the accumulated stuff of a life lived for other people's approval, could stay behind. Downstairs, I could hear the television again. Normal evening programming for a normal family evening, as if nothing significant had happened. As if I hadn't just been exposed as an unwelcome burden in the house I'd helped them afford. I paused at the top of the stairs, suitcase handle solid in my grip, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not fear of the unknown, but excitement about possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. The stairs creaked softly under my feet as I descended. Cassandra and Braden looked up from the couch as I entered the living room, their expressions shifting from surprise to something that might have been concern. "Walter, what are you doing with that suitcase?" Cassandra asked. "I'm taking your advice. I'm establishing boundaries." I walked to the coffee table where my house keys had sat for the past 3 years, right next to the remote control and yesterday's mail. The metal felt cool against my palm as I picked them up for the last time. "Now wait just a minute," Braden said, standing up from the couch. "Let's not do anything hasty here, we can work this out." "There's nothing hasty about this decision. I've been thinking about it for a long time. Tonight just gave me the clarity I needed." I placed the keys gently on the coffee table, the small click echoing through the room like a period at the end of a very long sentence. "Cassandra, I need you to understand something. For 20 years, I've believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good father meant putting your needs before mine, your comfort before mine, your happiness before mine. I thought that's what family meant." She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I continued. "But tonight you taught me something valuable. You taught me the difference between love and enabling, between family and exploitation, between being generous and being a fool." "Dad, you're being dramatic. We never said—" "You called me dead weight, a burden. You said I'm something you have to carry, not something you choose to love. And you know what? You're right. This arrangement isn't working for anyone." Walking out, the symbolic rebirth. I moved toward the front door, suitcase wheels rolling smoothly across the hardwood floors I'd helped install when they first bought this house. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if I were shedding years of accumulated weight with every inch of distance. "Where are you going to go?" Cassandra's voice carried a note of something that might have been panic. "You don't have anywhere to go." I paused with my hand on the doorknob, looking back at them both. These people who had shared my home, my meals, my life for so many years, who had taken my love and turned it into a weapon against my self-respect. I have everywhere to go. The whole world is available to people who aren't dead weight. The front door opened easily, summer evening air rushing in to fill the space between my old life and whatever came next. Behind me, I could hear Cassandra starting to say something, but I was already crossing the threshold. The door closed with the same deliberate care I'd used thousands of times before. But this time, I was on the other side of it, suitcase in hand, standing on a porch that no longer belonged to me. And for the first time in years, that felt like freedom instead of loss. Cedar Falls at night was different than I remembered. Softer somehow, more forgiving. The streetlights created pools of warm yellow on the empty pavement, and my breath formed small clouds in the cool Iowa air that dissipated like old regrets. The familiar weight of my wallet pressed against my chest, containing not just cash but credit cards that were about to become very important in ways Cassandra and Braden couldn't imagine. As I walked, pulling my suitcase behind me, I wasn't thinking about where I was going to sleep tonight. I was thinking about what I was going to do tomorrow, and the day after that, and for the rest of whatever life I had left to live. The Riverside Inn was a modest place on the outskirts of downtown, the kind of family-run establishment that had survived decades of chain hotel competition by offering genuine hospitality instead of corporate efficiency. The night clerk was an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize someone in transition. "Just passing through?" she asked as I signed the registration card. "Starting over," I replied, and was surprised by how good the words felt in my mouth. She nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd checked in her share of people making difficult life changes. "Well, you've picked a good place for new beginnings. Room 14 has a nice view of the river, quiet spot, good for thinking." Room 14 smelled like lavender cleaning products and fresh linens. A double bed with a handmade quilt, a small table with 2 chairs, and a window that framed the Cedar River as it curved through downtown. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine for the night. No one to ask permission from, no one to inconvenience, no one to call me a burden for existing in the space. I unpacked systematically, hanging clothes in the narrow closet, arranging toiletries on the bathroom counter. Maria's photograph went on the nightstand where her smile could keep me company in this strange new chapter of our story together. When everything was organized, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my cell phone. The screen showed 17 missed calls from Cassandra and 12 from Braden, along with a growing collection of text messages that I scrolled through without reading. Instead, I opened my banking app and began to review my accounts with the methodical precision that had made me successful in my accounting career. Checking account, $8,347. Savings account, $23,891. Investment portfolio, $127,000. Credit cards with a combined available credit of $75,000. More than enough to disappear completely if I chose to. More than enough to start over somewhere new, build a life that belonged entirely to me. But as I studied those numbers, I realized disappearing wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something much more satisfying than simply vanishing. I wanted justice. Not revenge. Justice. The kind that comes from actions having consequences, from people finally understanding the true cost of their choices. I opened a notebook I'd grabbed from the hotel's small business center and began to write. Not emotional ramblings or bitter complaints, but a careful, systematic plan for dismantling the financial support system that had enabled Cassandra and Braden's entitlement for years. First, remove authorized users from all credit cards. Both of them had been using my cards for everything from grocery shopping to luxury purchases, treating my credit limits like a bottomless well of free money. That would end tomorrow morning. Second, cancel any automatic payments I'd been making on their behalf. The supplemental car insurance, the premium cable package, the gym memberships they'd insisted were necessities for their lifestyle. Let them discover what their actual monthly expenses looked like without my subsidies. Third, review and revoke any financial commitments I'd made for future expenses. The Hawaii vacation I'd booked for all 3 of us next month, including first-class flights and an ocean view suite at the Grand Wailea. The registration fees for Braden's professional development conference. Cassandra's planned shopping trip to Chicago for her fall wardrobe refresh. Each line item represented another way I'd prioritize their comfort over my own dignity. Each cancellation would be a small lesson in the difference between privilege and entitlement. Morning came with the sound of the river, and sunlight streaming through curtains I'd actually chosen to leave open, because no one was there to complain about being woken up too early. I dressed carefully, choosing my best casual clothes for a day that would require a certain level of professional presentation. The hotel's breakfast room was small but cheerful, filled with the kinds of people I rarely encountered in Cassandra's social circle. Construction workers grabbing coffee before early shifts, elderly couples on modest road trips, traveling salespeople managing their own expenses instead of charging everything to someone else's accounts. I sat by the window with my coffee and wheat toast, watching the river flow past while I mentally rehearsed the conversations I would be having today. Each one would be professional, polite, and absolutely final. First National Bank of Cedar Falls occupied a historic building on Main Street, all marble floors and high ceilings that spoke of permanence and serious financial business. I'd been banking here for 37 years, long enough that several of the tellers knew me by name and remembered when I'd first opened accounts for Cassandra's college fund. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell." Patricia, the senior teller, greeted me with genuine warmth. "How can we help you today?" "I need to remove authorized users from several of my accounts and credit cards," I said, placing my identification on the counter with the steady confidence of a man who'd finally remembered that his money belonged to him. Patricia's professional smile faltered slightly. "Of course, sir. May I ask which authorized users you'd like to remove?" "All of them. Cassandra Hartwell Morrison and Braden Morrison. Complete removal from every account, every card, every automatic payment system." She pulled up my accounts on her computer, and I could see her eyebrows rise as she scrolled through the recent transaction history. 6 months of Cassandra's shopping habits displayed in stark numerical reality. $347 at Nordstrom for a casual dinner outfit. $892 at Williams-Sonoma for kitchen gadgets she'd used exactly once. $200 at the spa for what she'd called essential self-care treatments. "Mr. Hartwell, this is quite comprehensive. Are you certain you want to remove all access? Sometimes family members find it convenient to maintain some level of shared account privileges." "Patricia, let me ask you something. How much would you say I've spent on authorized user purchases in the past 12 months? She scrolled through the records, her expression growing more concerned with each page. "Sir, it appears to be approximately $34,000. $34,000 in unauthorized spending by people who called me dead weight yesterday evening. Yes, I'm certain about removing all access." The paperwork took 45 minutes to complete. Each form I signed felt like reclaiming another piece of myself that I'd forgotten belonged to me. Patricia processed everything with professional discretion, though I caught her shaking her head slightly as she reviewed some of the more extravagant purchases. "The changes will be effective immediately," she explained, sliding the completed documents into a folder. "All cards linked to your accounts will require your direct authorization for any future transactions." "Perfect. And Patricia, thank you for handling this with such care. I know it's probably unusual." "Mr. Hartwell, in 30 years of banking, I've seen every kind of family financial situation you can imagine. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach people to stand on their own feet." I was barely out of the bank when my phone started buzzing with the intensity of an angry wasp. Cassandra's name flashed on the screen repeatedly, but I let each call go to voicemail while I walked toward my next destination. The sounds of downtown Cedar Falls, car doors closing, people greeting each other on the sidewalk, the normal rhythms of a community going about its business, felt like a soundtrack to my liberation. When I finally stopped at a coffee shop and listened to the messages, the evolution from confusion to panic was almost comical. Message 1, 9:23 a.m. "Dad, my card got declined at Target. There must be some kind of mistake with the bank. Can you call them and fix whatever technical issue they're having?" Message 3, 9:47 a.m. Walter, this is ridiculous. I'm standing in the middle of Whole Foods with a cart full of groceries and your credit card isn't working. People are staring. Fix this immediately. Message 7, 10:15 a.m. What the hell did you do? Braden's card got declined at the gas station. Mine won't work anywhere, and the bank says you removed us from all your accounts. You can't just cut us off without warning. Message 12, 11:03 a.m. Dad, please call me back. I know we had some harsh words yesterday, but this is insane. How are we supposed to pay for anything? How are we supposed to manage our expenses? You can't just abandon your family like this. I deleted each message after listening, feeling nothing but a deep sense of satisfaction that the consequences of their behavior were arriving with such precise timing. Midwest Travel Solutions occupied a cheerful storefront between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, the kind of small business that had survived the internet age by offering personal service and genuine expertise. The agent, a woman named Linda with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around her eyes, welcomed me with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved helping people plan adventures. "What kind of trip are you thinking about?" she asked as I settled into the comfortable chair across from her desk. "Something I've been postponing for 20 years. Ireland, Scotland, maybe England. 3 weeks, maybe a month. First-class accommodations, but not ostentatious. I want to see castles and countryside, drink good whiskey, and eat meals in pubs where nobody knows my history." Linda's eyes lit up with the excitement of a professional who'd just been handed an interesting challenge. "Oh, how wonderful. A proper British Isles tour. Are you traveling alone?" "Completely alone. And Linda? I want to leave as soon as possible. This week if we can manage it." For the next 2 hours, we planned an itinerary that would have been impossible when every decision had to be negotiated through other people's schedules and preferences. Edinburgh Castle and Highland distilleries, the cliffs of Moher and Dublin's literary pubs, Cotswold villages, and London theatres. The total comes to $18,000 for everything, Linda explained, sliding the detailed itinerary across her desk. That includes first-class flights, luxury hotels, rental car, all meals and guided tours of the historical sites. It's comprehensive, but given your timeline, it's actually quite reasonable. Perfect. Let's book it. As I handed over my credit card, not a shared account that required justification for every purchase, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, selfish excitement about something that was entirely for my own pleasure. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the travel planning session, but I'd kept it on silent to avoid interrupting Linda's professional presentation. When I checked it afterward, I found 23 missed calls and a collection of increasingly frantic text messages. The most recent text from Braden was particularly revealing. "Walter, you need to come home right now. Cassandra is having a panic attack. Our mortgage payment is due tomorrow and our checking account is overdrawn. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. This has gone far enough." I stared at the message for a long moment, trying to remember when their mortgage payment had become my responsibility, when their checking account balance had become my concern, when their financial crisis had become my emergency. The answer, I realized, was gradually. So gradually that I'd never noticed the exact moment when I stopped being a father, who occasionally helped his adult daughter and became a permanent financial life support system for two people who'd learned to treat my generosity as an entitlement. Instead of responding to the text, I called the hotel from Linda's office and extended my stay for another week. Then I called the restaurant where I'd made reservations for one at 7 p.m. and asked them to prepare their best table for a guest who was celebrating something special. The Riverside Bistro was the kind of elegant establishment I'd always wanted to try, but never suggested, because Cassandra preferred chain restaurants with familiar menus and predictable experiences. The maitre d' led me to a corner table overlooking the Cedar River, where candles reflected off the water, and the sounds of evening birds provided a soundtrack more soothing than any playlist. "Will anyone be joining you this evening?" the server asked as she presented the wine menu. "No, just me, and I'm in no hurry whatsoever." I ordered the chef's tasting menu paired with wines selected by the sommelier, an indulgence that would have required days of justification in my previous life. Tonight, it felt like a reasonable celebration of my first day as a free man. The food was extraordinary. Delicate preparations that spoke of skill and creativity. Ingredients chosen for flavor rather than familiarity. Each course arrived with a description of its inspiration and preparation, delivered by servers who understood that dining alone didn't mean being lonely. Between the third and fourth courses, my phone vibrated with what would be the evening's final communication from my former household. The caller ID showed home, the landline I'd installed and paid for throughout my residency there. I answered on the fourth ring. Walter? Thank God. Where are you? We've been worried sick. Cassandra's voice was strained, higher than usual, carrying the edge of someone whose comfortable assumptions had been shattered. I'm having dinner at the Riverside Bistro. The duck confit is exceptional. You should try it sometime. When you can afford it. This isn't funny, Dad. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? We can't pay our bills. We can't buy groceries. Braden had to borrow money from his brother just to put gas in his car. I took a sip of the wine, a lovely burgundy that paired perfectly with the roasted root vegetables. Cassandra, let me ask you something. How did adults manage their expenses before I moved in with you? That's not the point. You can't just... It's exactly the point. You're both employed. You both have college degrees that I paid for. You both have professional careers that should provide adequate income for people who don't consider themselves dead weight. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller and less certain than before. Dad, I'm sorry about what I said yesterday. I was frustrated and tired, and I spoke out of anger. But this is extreme. You're punishing us for words spoken in the heat of the moment. I'm not punishing anyone, Cassandra. I'm simply no longer subsidizing a lifestyle you can't afford independently. There's a difference. I gestured to the server for another glass of wine and continued the conversation with the calm precision I'd once reserved for difficult client meetings. Let me share some numbers with you, since numbers don't lie the way emotions do. In the past 6 years, I've contributed $247,000 to your household expenses, not counting the mortgage down payment or the wedding costs. That's an average of $41,000 per year, on top of free rent, utilities, and meals. Dad, we never asked you to keep track. I'm an accountant, Cassandra. I always keep track. Do you know what $41,000 per year could have bought me? A very comfortable apartment of my own. Regular travel to visit my sister in Oregon. Hobbies, classes, restaurants, books. All the small luxuries that make life enjoyable for people who aren't considered burdens by their families. Another silence, this one punctuated by what sounded like muffled crying in the background. What do you want from us? She asked finally. I don't want anything from you, Cassandra. That's the point. For the first time in years, I don't want or need anything from anyone. It's remarkably liberating. So you're just going to abandon us? Leave us to figure out everything on our own? I'm going to let you be the independent adults you've always claimed to be. The adults who were capable enough to criticize my lifestyle choices, but apparently not capable enough to manage your own. I ended the call and returned my attention to the meal, savoring the final courses with the appreciation of someone who'd finally learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. I woke up naturally for the first time in months, without an alarm clock or anyone else's schedule to accommodate. Sunlight streamed through the hotel windows, and I lay in bed for several minutes, simply enjoying the silence. No television news shows chosen by someone else. No conversations about daily logistics that somehow always became my responsibility to solve. After a leisurely breakfast in the hotel restaurant, eggs Benedict and fresh fruit that I selected based purely on my own preferences, I began making the phone calls that would complete my systematic withdrawal from my family's financial ecosystem. The insurance company was first. I'd been paying the premiums on Cassandra and Braden's supplemental life insurance policies, their dental coverage, and the comprehensive auto insurance that covered accidents and theft well beyond the state-required minimums. I need to cancel several policies effective immediately, I told the customer service representative, a pleasant woman who handled the request with professional efficiency. Of course, sir. May I ask the reason for the cancellations? The beneficiaries are no longer my financial responsibility. Next was the credit monitoring service I'd purchased after Braden's identity was compromised in a data breach at his former employer. Then the premium cable package with all the movie channels and sports networks. The family cell phone plan that included unlimited international calling. The subscription services for streaming, music, and digital magazines that had accumulated over the years like barnacles on a ship's hull. Each cancellation felt like removing another chain, another obligation that had seemed reasonable when I believed I was building something meaningful with people who appreciated my sacrifices. Morris & Associates occupied a restored Victorian house near the courthouse, the kind of establishment that specialized in estate planning and family law, with an emphasis on discretion and careful documentation. James Morrison was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with the careful attention to detail that comes from handling people's most important legal decisions. Mr. Hartwell, I understand you'd like to revise your will completely. I want to rewrite it from scratch. New beneficiaries, new executors, new distribution terms, everything. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. That's certainly your prerogative. Are there specific changes you have in mind? For the next 2 hours, we worked through the details of dismantling the inheritance I'd been building for Cassandra and redirecting it toward organizations that actually helped people in need. The Abandoned Seniors Foundation, which provided housing and support for elderly people whose families had discarded them. The Cedar Falls Literacy Project, which taught reading skills to adults who'd been failed by various educational systems. The Regional Food Bank, which understood the difference between temporary assistance and permanent dependency. This is quite comprehensive, Morrison observed as we reviewed the final documents. Your previous beneficiaries will receive notification that they're no longer named in your will. Are you prepared for their reaction to that news? Mr. Morrison, yesterday my daughter called me dead weight and told me I was a burden on her shoulders. Today I'm ensuring that burden will be permanently lifted upon my death. I'd say we're all getting exactly what we want. I returned to the Riverside Inn to find Cassandra and Braden sitting in the lobby like supplicants waiting for an audience with a king. They looked haggard, stressed in a way I'd never seen before. Cassandra's usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and Braden wore the rumpled clothes of someone who'd slept poorly and dressed hastily. Walter, thank God. Braden stood as I approached, his relief visible and pathetic. We need to talk. We need to apologize, Cassandra added quickly, her eyes red-rimmed with what appeared to be genuine tears. We need to fix this. I looked at them both, these people who had shared my home and my resources for years, who had taken my love and transformed it into a weapon against my dignity, and felt nothing but mild curiosity about what they thought they could say to change the mathematical reality of our situation. You can follow me to my room if you'd like, I said calmly, but I should warn you that I have dinner reservations at 7 and I intend to keep them. Room 14 felt smaller with 3 people in it, but I gestured toward the 2 chairs by the window while I sat on the edge of the bed. Through the glass, the Cedar River continued its eternal flow, indifferent to human drama and family dysfunction. Walter, we've been talking all night. Cassandra began, her voice carefully modulated in a way that suggested she'd rehearsed this speech. We realize we've taken you for granted. We realize we haven't shown proper appreciation for everything you've done for us over the years. We want to make it right, Braden added. We want to sit down like a family and work out a budget, establish some guidelines, make sure everyone's needs are being met fairly. I studied their faces, searching for any sign of genuine understanding, rather than simply panic about their changed financial circumstances. What I saw was desperation wearing the mask of contrition. Tell me something, I said. What specifically are you apologizing for? They exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for the question. For not being more grateful? Cassandra offered tentatively. For taking advantage of your generosity. Braden added. Those are vague generalities. I asked for specifics. What exactly did you do wrong yesterday that led to this conversation today? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Outside, I could hear the sounds of normal life continuing. Cars passing, people walking, the ordinary rhythms of a world that kept turning despite personal crises. We said some things we didn't mean, Cassandra finally admitted. What things? We called you a burden. What else? We said you were dead weight. And we told you to find somewhere else to live. On my birthday, after I'd cooked dinner for friends who actually wanted to celebrate with me, in the house I helped you buy, using money I'd withdrawn from my account to purchase groceries for a party you then mocked in front of guests. Each factual statement landed like a physical blow. I could see them both flinching as the full scope of their behavior was laid out in chronological order. We were wrong, Braden said finally. We were completely, absolutely wrong. And we're sorry. What are you sorry for? That you said those things or that saying them had consequences? Another long silence while they struggled with the distinction between regret and accountability. Dad, please. Cassandra's voice broke slightly. We can't pay our mortgage without your help. We can't afford our car payments or our insurance or our basic living expenses. Everything we've built depends on the financial support of someone you consider dead weight. Yes, okay, yes, we've been living beyond our means and we couldn't do it without your help. We've been irresponsible and ungrateful and cruel. Is that what you want to hear? I want to hear the truth, Cassandra. And the truth is that you're not sorry for hurting me. You're sorry that hurting me had financial consequences you didn't anticipate. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the river while I chose my next words carefully. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to that house, your house, and you're going to figure out how to live within your actual means. You're going to downsize, budget, make sacrifices, and learn what it feels like to be financially responsible for yourselves. And you? Braden asked. I'm going to Scotland, then Ireland, then wherever else I feel like going, for as long as I feel like going, spending my own money on my own pleasure without asking anyone's permission or justifying my choices to people who think I'm a burden. Cassandra started crying in earnest now. Not the calculated tears of manipulation, but the raw grief of someone finally understanding what they'd lost. We'll change, Dad. We'll be better. We'll treat you with the respect you deserve. You had 20 years to treat me with respect, Cassandra. You chose to wait until I was financially unavailable to discover its value. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. They left the hotel room with the defeated posture of people who'd gambled everything on an apology and lost. Through my window, I watched them walk to their car, the car I'd helped them buy when Braden's previous vehicle died unexpectedly. They sat in the parking lot for several minutes, probably having another desperate conversation about options that didn't exist. Finally, they drove away, leaving me alone with the satisfaction of decisions well made and consequences fairly distributed. I called the front desk and extended my stay for another week while I waited for my passport to be expedited and my international travel arrangements to be finalized. Then I called the concierge service Linda had arranged and confirmed my dinner reservations for one at the best restaurant in Dublin for next Thursday evening. The next morning I walked downtown to the public library, a beautiful brick building I'd never had time to explore when my days were consumed with managing other people's crises. I checked out travel guides and Irish poetry, books about Scottish history and English literature. For the first time in years, I had the mental space to read for pleasure instead of just scanning newspapers for current events to discuss at dinner tables, where nobody really listened to my opinions anyway. At the coffee shop next door, I struck up a conversation with the barista, a young woman named Sarah, who was saving money for graduate school in social work. She reminded me of Cassandra at that age, full of dreams and ambitions, but without the entitlement that had corrupted my daughter's character over the years. "Traveling alone sounds so brave," Sarah said as I told her about my upcoming trip. "I've always wanted to see Ireland, but I'm too chicken to go by myself." "The only thing braver than traveling alone is staying in situations that make you unhappy just because they're familiar," I replied, surprising myself with the wisdom that had emerged from my recent upheaval. 6 months later. I'm telling this from a cottage I've rented in the Cotswolds, where morning mist rolls over stone walls that have stood for centuries, and every pub has a story that predates America itself. My hair has grown longer and grayer, my clothes are more comfortable than stylish, and my bank account reflects the expenses of a man who's finally learned to spend money on his own happiness. The postcards I've sent to Harold and Beatrice are displayed on the mantelpiece like trophies, evidence of adventures that belong entirely to me. The photographs I've taken with my new camera, another purchase that required no justification to anyone, fill albums that will never need to accommodate other people's preferences or opinions. Cassandra and Braden lost the house, of course. The mortgage payments were simply beyond their actual means once my subsidies disappeared. They've moved to a small apartment across town and taken second jobs to cover expenses that used to be my responsibility. According to Harold, who updates me occasionally, they've stopped asking about my whereabouts or when I might return. They've learned what I spent years trying to teach them through generosity, that money has to come from somewhere, and independence requires the ability to support yourself rather than depending on people you're willing to call dead weight. The inheritance they expected is now funding scholarships for adult learners, support services for abandoned seniors, and programs that help people distinguish between love and enabling. My money will continue to make a positive difference in the world long after I'm gone, directed toward people who understand gratitude because they've experienced genuine need. As for me, I wake up every morning in a different place, surrounded by different possibilities, accountable to no one but myself. I eat what I want, go where I please, spend my money on experiences that bring me joy, rather than obligations that bring me grief. Sometimes, late at night in whatever bed and breakfast or hotel room has become my temporary home, I think about Maria and wonder what she would make of this transformation. I think she would approve. She always said that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just fear of being alone dressed up as virtue. I'm no longer afraid of being alone because I've finally learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is what I felt sitting at that dinner table, surrounded by people who saw me as a financial resource rather than a human being. Solitude is what I feel now, traveling through landscapes that take my breath away, meeting strangers who treat me with more respect than my own family ever did. And if that makes me selfish, well, I'm 67 years old. I've earned the right to be selfish with whatever time I have left. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt taken for granted by people who should cherish you, if you've ever wondered whether love should require you to accept disrespect, if you've ever needed permission to put your own happiness first, then please hit that subscribe button and share this video. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach people that their actions have consequences. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from situations that diminish your worth. And sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is that you're never too old to start over, never too set in your ways to change your life, and never too late to discover what freedom really feels like. My name is Walter Eugene Hartwell, and this is the story of how I stopped being dead weight and started living like the valuable, worthy, independent man I'd forgotten I could be. The best years of my life didn't begin until I was 67 years old. What are you waiting for?